Good morning and welcome to the 22nd meeting in 2025 of the Local Government Housing and Planning Committee. I remind all members and witnesses to ensure that their devices are on silent. And Fulton McGregor MSP will be joining us online this morning. The first item on our agenda is to decide whether to take items 5, 6 and 7 in private. Are members agreed? You're agreed. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence as part of our scrutiny of the proposed National Good Food Nation Plan from Marie Goujon, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Rural Affairs, Land Reform and Islands, and she is joined by Scottish Government officials, James Hamilton, Solicitor, Laura Hunter, Procurement Policy, and Tracy McConlon, who's the head of the Good Food Nation team. And I welcome our witnesses to the meeting. We have around 60 minutes for this discussion, and I will invite the Cabinet Secretary to provide a short opening statement before turning to questions from members. Cabinet Secretary.
Okay, thank you very much, Convener. And I really want to thank the committee, first of all, for inviting me to give evidence today. I was also attending the Health and Sport Committee last week to talk about the health and social care aspects of the proposed National Good Food Nation Plan. So it's good to be back in Parliament and actually appear in front of a committee that I think this might be my first appearance in this committee, actually. But I think it just shows the broad spectrum of interest that there is in the Good Food Nation Plan and how many different policy areas that it touches too. What it means to be a good food nation, I know, means different things to different people. I think that we could probably all agree that Scotland's food system does have a lot of strengths. For one thing, we are, of course, renowned for the incredible produce that comes from both our land and seas. But we also have to acknowledge that our food system does face many challenges, and a key aim of our work through the Good Food Nation and the proposed plan that we're discussing today is to really try and shift that dial and to create a food system that enables and promotes a healthy population and all the other benefits that then stem from that. Now, the proposed national plan sets out the practical steps that we're going to take to embed this, what is, I think, a fresh approach to policy development across national government. But this is also going to be the first in what I know will be a long line of Good Food Nation plans. I think it really is a forward-thinking ambition, but we are also realistic about the scale of the challenge. We are trying to make a systemic change here, and to do that we know will take time. Now, this is an iterative journey, and the scrutiny and input of the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Foods Commission and civil society more broadly is going to play a really important role in shaping that. And of course, this committee will recognise the really vital role that local government and our health boards are also going to play in this work. Now, we know that some are already leading the way and improving their local food systems, whereas others are just at the start of that journey. But ultimately, I think we're all working towards the same goal for Scotland to be that nation where people from every walk of life take pride and pleasure in and benefit from the food that they produce, buy, cook, serve and eat each day. So I really look forward to continued working with this committee, Parliament, local government and health boards as we look to progress this work. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And it's good to welcome you to this committee and into the space of local government. And obviously, as the Good Food Nation Plan will be affecting local government, that's why we thought it was important for us to take a look at that. And I think last week's sessions, I hope they were helpful for you. I think that was very good to dig into those areas and talk to local authorities and others around the impact that the plans will have on them. I'll open the questions and then I'll bring in other members. So I think last week the plan was broadly welcomed in principle, but there were some concerns that were raised. And one of the ones that I'm interested in is from the Highland Good Food Partnership. In our call for views, they talked about the plan not proposing any new actions or targets and not committing to new indicators or areas of policy development. So I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are on that and where the plan has driven new or further action.
Thank you very much, Convener. I mean, to say first and foremost, I mean, there was a lot of written evidence that I know across the two committees, and the call for evidence was received, which I think, you know, just thinking back to my opening comments, reflects just the broad range of interest that there is in the work that we're doing here. I think in relation to some of the concerns, and I know that came through in other pieces of written evidence, and what the committee has also heard directly about the indicators and targets. But I think that essentially what this plan does is we've got the indicators that we have brought forward for the outcomes are going to help be provide that initial baseline from which we can look to progress from here. And while I understand and appreciate the concern about lack of new targets or indicators, that's not to say that we're not going to be developing that work. And I think we have been quite open and transparent within the plan itself about the areas where either that's more data we need to collect to be able to look at indicators in the future or to look to develop new targets. On that, we've also asked bodies such as the Scottish Animal Welfare Commission to help us with some of that work, what that could look like for whether that's indicators and targets in relation to animal health and welfare, because we recognise we don't have all the information that we need. Because it's when we're looking to develop new information or new targets, we need to really, the data collection element of that can be quite a big undertaking in itself. So I think the plan, as we've proposed it, I think it is a really important first step. It will help us to develop that baseline from which we can look to continue to improve from here onwards as well. So I think we needed to be able to collect all that information. But again, we do recognise that there is more work to do from here, and this plan is just that initial first step.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jess. As you said in the beginning, in your opening statement, it's an iterative journey.
Yes.
I've got a question around cooperation. So last week we had East Ayrshire and also Aberdeen Council in, and in both contexts, there's quite a lot of cooperation happening. But there has been concern voiced that there was a lack of cooperation between government, local authorities and health boards in developing this plan, and concern that that could risk plans actually working against each other. So I'd be interested to understand how you imagine supporting cooperation happening in areas where local authorities and NH board boundaries are different.
I'll probably hand over to Tracy in a moment, who can explain a bit more, because Tracy's been leading on the engagement that we've had with some of the other authorities too. And that's the thing, some people are quite far advanced in terms of how they've been looking at food and different strategies that they have in place at the moment. I mean, I think the balance that we've tried to strike with what is contained within the Act, it was really to ensure that while we have those kind of guideline principles of what we think local authorities and health boards should have included within their plans, I think it is also important to get that they have that flexibility, and that each area across Scotland can then develop the outcomes and indicators that are most relevant for them. But of course, we have published guidance in relation to that. There has been engagement with COSLA and with health boards to discuss that. Of course, the initial focus has been on producing our own national Good Food Nation plan, which has involved a lot of work to get us to this point. When you consider that we had the consultation towards the start of last year, there was a lot of feedback in response to that we've had to deal with and look to. But we also, it's contained within the Act that local authorities and health boards will have to have regard to the National Good Food Nation plan as well, which we hope will also help with that further guidance. But I'll hand over to Tracy, who, as I say, has been engaging.
Yes, we've done some work with both local authorities and health boards, and also worked in collaboration with the Good Food Nation Living Lab at the University of Edinburgh, who are doing some work with local authorities and health boards as well, so in order to be as efficient as possible. So we published the guidance that set out the legislative requirements of the Act, because we had realised there was some misunderstandings of how the legislation worked in practice. So we set out a piece of guidance that explains what those legislative requirements are. And then the workshop that we ran with the Living Lab was focused on that, but also allowed for discussion around some of the concerns that had been raised, for example, in relation to the commencement of Section 10. And that was followed up by a survey to get feedback from the relevant authorities as to what their preferred timescale was. And that's being fed into the discussions that we'll be having around the commencement of Section 10. I think having a workshop like that, it's been noted that some local authorities and health boards are further ahead with their food plans than others. So I think it was very useful to learn from their experience and have that shared knowledge. And once the national plan is published at the end of this year, and decisions have been made about commencements of Section 10, the plans will have some level of coherence, because the legislation is quite prescriptive in terms of what it sets out. There will have to be regard to the national plan, which sets out the outcomes that the Scottish ministers have put into that. And I think it will then, as the local authorities and health boards start work, we have plans for engaging with them further to share good practice, learn from our experience of developing a national plan, and feed that into the local plans as well. So there's been ongoing there's going to be ongoing engagement, but we've already had some as well, which has been incredibly useful, both for, I hope, the relevant authorities and for us in terms of getting their feedback as well.
That sounds great. Just that workshop sounds good. Did you get all 32 and all health boards coming to that, or how much? What was the level of engagement?
It was very good engagement. It wasn't all, but the survey went out to all of the health boards, and I think we got engagement from nearly all of them. I think we got a really good response to that, and we would sometimes get a couple of responses from each local authority as well, depending on which bits of the local authority was leading on the local Good Food Nation plans. So it's very useful feedback from them.
Great. And the guidelines, were those the ones that were published in March of this year?
The gangs,
Yes.
yes.
Great. Thanks very much. I'm going to now move on and bring in Evelyn Tweed.
Convener, and good morning Cabinet Secretary, and good morning to the panel. Thanks for your answers so far. Last week, witnesses noted that councils were at different stages of the Good Food Nation journey, and they also said there is no national record of progress being made. Is this something the Scottish Government will consider?
I think you're absolutely right in relation to the fact that there are some local authorities that are quite far advanced, and I think particularly when you look at Fife, there's the Food for Fife strategy. There are other local authorities who are quite far advanced in the work that they're taking forward, whereas others are at the earlier stages of that work, as I'd already outlined. In terms of collecting all that information, I mean, as Tracy's just outlined, we haven't commenced Section 10 yet. We're very much in discussions with local authorities about that. So we're not as yet collecting all that information. We wouldn't expect all local authorities to have delivered their plans, because we haven't commenced that part of the Act, and we are still involved in those discussions with them. But of course, as you've heard Tracy outline there, we are having those conversations because we want to make sure that local authorities feel ready and feel they have the information they need to progress with that work.
Obviously, various councils are concerned about the timescales. They're concerned about Section 10. Obviously, there's local government elections coming. Is there going to be any flexibility in terms of those timescales?
Well, once we commence Section 10, there is a 12-month timescale that comes alongside that, and that's why we haven't commenced that as yet, because of the discussions we've had with local authorities. I think also through our work in developing the proposed plan as we have it, I think it's fair to say it has taken quite a bit of time and a lot of work for us to be able to get to this stage. So I think between that and the conversations that Tracy referenced as well that we've been having with local authorities, we've been trying to understand the level of resource that might be required and when an appropriate time to trigger that it might be. And I think it's only fair that we still continue to have those discussions, because I think the last thing we want to do is commence that part of the Act and then people feel like they don't have enough time to have their plans in good time for that. So that's where that's ongoing at the moment, and we are still continuing those conversations because we do want to make sure that people feel they have the resources and the time to be able to bring in and develop their own plans.
So it's very much under consideration.
Yes, so of course I'd be happy to keep the committee updated when we're looking to commence that. But again, we don't want to put local authorities under particular pressure right now when we've still been trying to bottom out what resources might be needed for that in recognition of the work that we've seen ourselves and what's taken us to get to this stage.
Grand.
Gallagher.
Convener, good morning Cabinet Secretary. It's on this exact issue because local authorities will need to be given the right amount of time in order to implement this plan. For example, when local development plans were put into place, local authorities had up to 5 years. So I'm very concerned that it seems to be quite a substantial lesser amount of time that might be considered for local authorities to actually produce these plans. Now, you said at the start that local authorities seem to be at different stages. So can you advise the committee, where local authorities are at? What percentage are advanced, would you say? What percentage are not advanced? Because what you're going to do effectively is have 32 local authorities at 32 different stages. And I don't think that's very good when you're trying to bring forward legislation in this field. You probably want local authorities to be at similar stages. So when the Act actually comes in and the commencement starts, they'll all be at the same starting point.
Yeah, well, I think it's just that some local authorities started on their food journey, looking at their food strategies in advance of the Good Food Nation work. So some of them have just been a bit more proactive in that space than others. And there are the specific legislative requirements that we will have in the development of those plans too. So I think I mentioned the strategy in Fife. There's I think Glasgow have done some work. There's South Lanarkshire and a strategy that they've developed. But the Good Food Nation plans have, as I say, a specific set of requirements and legislative requirements we expect local authorities to adhere to. So even within these strategies, they would still have to comply with that. But again, that's where the discussions that we're having, I mean, we had been through this in the scrutiny in the Act and what those timescales should be and what that should look like. And of course, Parliament then agreed to have that 12-month timescale from the point Section 10 is commenced. But that's why we haven't just delved right in and commenced that part of the Act, because having that engagement with local authorities, I think, is really, and as we've seen ourselves in the development of our own plan and the resource that's needed and required, it's given us that better understanding. So we don't intend there to be any surprises that suddenly we launch into this and then all local authorities just have that 12-month timescale. We want to make sure we get that right, that we have the guidance in place, that they feel able to commence with that work. So that's why that ongoing engagement we have with local authorities is really important for that.
It's South Lanarkshire Council that are one of the councils that have raised concerns about the timescales. So they might even be, quite proactive, but even they have raised concerns about the actual timescales themselves. Going back to, the commencement times, is this bad timing? Because you do have an election cycle in 2027, you'll have a budget cycle as well. Councils will have other priorities alongside this particular policy area that you're wanting to legislate in. So is this perhaps bad timing, or is it something that you think all councils will be able to achieve? And if they don't achieve it, what are the consequences for that?
Well, that's the thing. I think that all those points that you raise would be factors that we would look at in relation to that, and then when the appropriate time to commence Section 10 might be, I think, bearing in mind everything that you've said. So again, that very much is factored into the types of discussions we'll be having with local authorities, because it's not within anyone's interest for that section of that to be commenced and local authorities to feel that they don't have the time or resources that they need to be able to bring forward effective plans. We want to make sure that they have the ability to do that. So again, that's why that engagement is so important.
Thank you, Camilla.
Okay, thanks. Can I just ask a bit more about that? So we know that there are some local authorities that have been in this space for, I think we heard from East Ayrshire, they've been doing it for 20 or 21 years already. But the Section 10, when that trigger, so there's nothing to stop local authorities having been busy with the food journey or whatever we're calling it at the moment now, but the Section 10 triggers that requirement for them to actually then create this plan that has some specific elements to it. And does that also trigger the financial resource as well, specifically for creating that engagement and consultation that they have to do around those plans?
Well, I think for the development of plans, I think some may need to have that resource in advance, whether that's people that they need specifically to look at that. And I don't know if there's any other particular points within that you'd like to point out, Tracy, but you are right in that effect. I mean, yeah, once we commence that, there are 12 months to develop the plan, but I think that that's why we don't want to rush the commencement of Section 10, because we want to ensure that by the time we reach that trigger point for the 12 months to start, that people feel that they have the resources in place that they need and they feel able to complete the plan within that time.
Specifically is the amount of money that's attached to the requirement to create the plans for local authorities. Does that get triggered once Section 10 is commenced, or could that be given to them sooner?
This is part of the discussions that we're having right now, because if it involves recruitment of people, there may be a requirement for resources in advance of that. So that's all very much part of the conversations that we're having at the moment.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring in Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, last week Nourish Scotland were talking about the outcomes to all of this, and did it perhaps appear confusing and contradictory for there to be no outcomes discussed or contained within the legislation itself? So you could have a whole set of 32 different outcomes, plus possibly more. How do you see that? Do you see that kind of localism as being the correct thing to do? And how will any of us know that at the end of all of this, they've complied with anything, if they can define and determine their own outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really important point. And again, I think that's where we try to strike that balance in the legislation. So setting out the principles that we would expect those local authorities and health boards that we would like to see them achieve within those plans. But again, that there's the flexibility in relation to the outcomes, so that at that local level, people can determine that. And because I don't think, you could have, it could be very different in Glasgow to where it would be in my own local authority in Angus. So I think it's only right that we have that flexibility. I would like to think that we struck the right balance there. It's not an area that I remember there being too much concern expressed about when the Act was initially undergoing scrutiny in 2022, or there being much concern expressed about that, because again, it's about trying to get that flexibility. We want to make sure local authorities feel that they can work towards the outcomes that are going to be the most meaningful for them. But I think that scrutiny and that monitoring element is really important. We have set out the principles, as I've said. We've also said that they must have regard to the National Good Food Nation Plan. There are these different workshops. There will be that continued engagement with health boards and local authorities, so that overall that kind of guidance around that is helpful in the development of their plans. In relation to scrutiny specifically, I mean, I think that's where the role of the Scottish Food Commission is so important, because that will be their role to scrutinise, to provide information, research, advice, to look at, well, are the plans delivering against their outcomes in relation to what they've set out at a national level, as well as for the relevant authorities. And so I think that they have a really critical role when it comes to that, which I think it's important to highlight.
Are you happy with that? It seems a much softer approach, and probably the correct approach, actually, to allow local authorities to determine their own pathway towards this. I mean, as you said, East Ayrshire's been doing this for the last 20 years without any legislation and doing it quite well. So are you quite happy that, like, looking ahead to the next few years or so, when the government of the day will look back at this process to see if it's been successful, that this kind of structural approach within this piece of legislation will be okay and will be enough to deliver what you hope?
Well, I certainly hope so. I think the balance that we've tried to strike is the right one. And of course, this is the first step. I mean, this is a big change for government in terms of how we work and embedding different practices, and how we really change how we engage across different portfolios as well, and the consideration that will have to be given to this plan. And it is going to be new for local authorities and for health boards as well at the same time. So I do think the approach that we've taken is the right one. I think that the Food Commission is going to have a really important role throughout this as well, because they'll be able to monitor and see how all that is working, and if it's delivering against the intended outcomes too. So I think time is going to tell, but I do think it's important that local authorities have the ability to determine the outcomes that are important for their local area. What it is going to get important too, though, is in relation to the indicators and the measurements that they're using, because I think for us to be able to gather that information at a national level is helpful overall to see how things are being delivered. So how that might work, again, is part of the engagement and discussions that we'd be having with local authorities too. Okay,
thanks. And the convener asked a question about resourcing. Did you mention a figure? Is there any sort of figure allocated to the authorities to give them a kickstart with this, to help them to develop the plans and give them a little bit of resource to put behind it?
Well, the only figures that we would have associated that right now were the figures that we had anticipated and published as part of the financial memorandum when the Act was working its way through Parliament, and that was published in 2022. But again, having been through this process ourselves, we've taken the amount of resource and work that's been needed in that, which is why that ongoing engagement with local authorities is important. It is really just trying to bottom out what the resource might look like.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, convener.
Thanks. Just following on from that, there's been quite a bit of conversation about the concern that there's the money for the plans for local authorities, but what about implementation? And I take the point that you've, I think, said a few times in other places that it's not until there's the plans that you can actually look at resource and funding for actually implementation. But have you done any calculating, any looking at what it might cost a local authority to deliver a plan?
Again, that's what we're working on right now, to see what those resources are going to look like. But I would say even more broadly, though, I mean, ultimately the delivery of the plan, falls to many different areas. As I say, I was at the Health Committee last week where we were talking about the Population Health Framework and the work that's being delivered through that. So, of course, my portfolio in and of itself can't necessarily fund all of that work, of course, and that falls within the budgets of other portfolio areas. So what we're really discussing is what that initial resource looks like and what's needed to be able to get these plans off the ground and get that initial bit of work developed.
Okay, thanks. And I'm going to bring Megan Gallagher in.
Thank you again, Convener. Committee's heard evidence from stakeholders, from some of the stakeholders that we've taken evidence from, that a reallocation of the agricultural budget towards local authorities would help implement the Good Food Nation plan. So I'm just wondering, is this the Scottish Government's intention to go down this route? And I'm seeking reassurance perhaps from the Cabinet Secretary today that she does not look towards the agricultural budget to do this.
Well, again, I mean, I recognise that that's the view of some stakeholders, but as you can imagine, I know that other stakeholders would have the complete opposite view of that. And as has been outlined, the budget that we have for agriculture is ring-fenced for the use of that purposes. The vast majority of that goes out in relation to the direct payments that we make for our farmers and crofters that way. We haven't bottomed out what the resource request is going to look like for the development of those plans. And again, we're starting our budget discussions going into the next year, so I can't give any information or further information to the committee in relation to that. But as I say, the agricultural funding is ring-fenced for that purpose.
No, that's helpful. And in relation to the plan itself, it appears that it's quite cluttered in relation to the requirements for food strategies, potential community wealth building duties and other specific elements as well. So if the Scottish Government's aim is to simplify the policy and programme for the delivery itself, how is this going to be achieved when we've got another national plan and then the 46 new local food plans as well? I guess I'm asking, how do we make this bill relevant?
I appreciate it from the outside. It can appear that way and it can look very cluttered. And of course, there are a lot of things going on in all the different portfolio areas across government. But I think that, some of the areas that you've mentioned there have their own specific requirements. But for me, it's about how all these areas deliver our overall Good Food Nation outcomes. So this isn't an addition on top of. And you can see there, I mean, I've referenced the Population Health Framework already. There's been close cooperation between the Good Food Nation team and those working on population health. There's going to be a diet and healthy weight implementation plan developed on the back of that, which will help deliver on the Good Food Nation outcomes that we've set out. And the indicators will help us get that baseline information to monitor how all of that is doing. But I think we also can't forget, one of the most important things within the Act is about the specified functions and the descriptions, and the fact that as we're developing new policies, new strategies, new plans, we will have to have regard to the Good Food Nation plan. We are trying to embed a different way of working across government, of doing that with local government and with our health boards as well. So I don't see this as being just another thing that people, tick off and do, and it's going to sit and do something. We are giving effect to this plan. This is the first one in hopefully a long line of plans that will be coming forward. And, when you reference the food strategies there as an example, another legislative requirement, but that isn't part of that could form part of local authorities' Good Food Nation plan. But of course, there are very different legislative requirements for that, as opposed to what we'll be asking of local authorities through the Good Food Nation plans.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks, Megan. And now bringing in Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary and panel. Can I touch on a little bit when it comes to sort of procurement and the guidance with reference to that procurement? Because we have heard quite a lot of evidence about that. So it would be good to get a flavour from you. Does the Scottish Government intend to provide guidance to local authorities when it comes to the good food procurement itself? Because we did hear last week that Catering for Change document hasn't changed or hasn't been updated since 2011. And when it comes to small and medium-sized companies, when we're trying to ensure that there is that opportunity for procurement, that seems to be causing some issues. Now, East Ayrshire last week talked about that not one single butcher firm had made an application into ensuring that they were getting a supply. Now, that means that there has to be a blockage somewhere when it comes to procurement for that small and medium-sized company. So can I ask, why are local suppliers still having a difficulty in benefiting from local authority food procurement?
Right, there's a lot to unpack in that question, and I will ask Laura to come in a moment, I think, on some of the specifics in work and procurement. I think we've recognised within the plan that public procurement is hugely important when we look at overall spend, and I think the change that we can try and lever in through that. I think that when you look at our public authorities, I think it's about £220 million that we use, or that is available for that food procurement in particular. But we also recognise within the plan that, unfortunately, not all of this is necessarily within areas that are easy to resolve. You know, there are WTO regulations that we have to have consideration of, which don't allow you to specify something can be local. So we have to work carefully within the legal parameters that are set out for us. But there are, well, a number of pieces of legislation, regulations and statutory guidance that have been introduced over the past few years to really try and provide that flexibility for procurement, and so that we can see more local produce within our supply chains, and where we can really see that benefit for some of our small and medium enterprises. And again, it's an area that is quite often raised with me in the chamber, and why we think it is really important to have that focus on it within the plan itself. So I think when you want to consider some of the current flexibility that exists within that, you know, there's flexibility in designing menus, and that can focus on like PGI indicators. When you and different assurance schemes that say Quality Meat Scotland have, you can specify free range and organic. Contracts can be divided into smaller geographical lots as well, because we there is so much work that's underway to try and ensure that we are helping those small and medium-sized businesses too. And I think that when you look at the overall trajectory of what we see, I think about 60% of, I think it's just around about 17,000 contracts that there are suppliers, that goes to Scottish SMEs. So, and that's an area where we have seen gradual increases. But we recognise there is more that can be done. So that's why there is all this work underway. But I'll hand over to Laura, who'll be able to provide some more specific information about what some of that work looks like.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, a decision was taken to retire Catering for Change because there's already, I think, time had moved on, and there's now further guidance available in the public domain for buyers. Specifically, we essentially fund national toolkits and systems and guidance to support local procurement practice at an individual and organisational level, and including we have the Sustainable Procurement Tools, which is an online tool which contains a series of guidance documents, e-learning and case studies from across the public sector. And we also have a procurement journey website which provides guidance for buyers for each stage of the procurement process. We also have the Client Guide to Construction Projects, for example, and we have a commercial improvement a procurement and commercial improvement programme as well. And we essentially fund a range of training and resources. We have a specific framework in place which contains a couple of lots, one for procurement training, one for sustainable procurement training, and we offer events to the wider sector, and we continue to invest in our Procurement People of Tomorrow programme, which enables a pipeline of talent from schools and colleges and universities to bring young people and knowledge into the sector. But in terms of support for SMEs, we try and make it as simple as we possibly can for SMEs. We provide the Public Contract Scotland website, so to be able to bid for a public contract, businesses need to be registered on PCS, and all contracts valued at £50,000 for goods and services are advertised on there, and that allows suppliers to register there free of charge and receive alerts for contracts that they might be interested in. And many of the contracts awarded on Public Contract Scotland are won by SMEs, and as the Cabinet Secretary said, in 24-25, almost 17,000 suppliers were awarded contracts through PCS, and 77% of those were SMEs. And we support and promote free training and advice and resources for suppliers as well. You know, we part fund the supplier development programme.
All right, well, Thank you, because that's quite comprehensive, and as I say, it does give a flavour of where we are, but obviously there are pockets of areas that still maybe need a bit more support, and depending on which council or area. My second question is with reference to where the Scottish Government sees planning and licensing when it comes to helping deliver the Good Food Nation. Now, there have been talk, and there is examples that we have all over, where there are far too many fast food outlets, for example, around a school. And how do you square that circle of ensuring that you're providing for, but at the same time giving opportunity for business and entrepreneurs to expand and to be there?
No, you're absolutely right. And well, I think that we already have policies in place that reflect that through the NPF4. I think particularly when you're considering, hot food takeaways, there's a specific policy there that references that quite clearly says that development shouldn't be supported where there could be a risk that it impacts on the overall health and well-being in areas, particularly disadvantaged areas. So that overarching policy principle is there, but ultimately we wouldn't be looking to, well, those decisions are up to local authorities and their planning and licensing committees as well. But of course we would be expecting, as you would, that they would be giving consideration to the wider overarching policies such as that I've mentioned in NPF4.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Willie Coffey's got a supplementary on this.
Yeah, thanks very much again, Convener. Cabinet Secretary, I've heard a case recently in East Ayrshire where, despite a local smaller supplier bidding for a particular contract, they lost out to the bigger supplier who could provide a much lower price, and that despite all the local criteria and so on being in favour of the smaller supplier. Do you think the boundaries are clear enough for councils to consider bids from local smaller suppliers who usually inevitably offer a higher price? Do you think it's clear enough for the councils to proceed to offer contracts to local suppliers even if the price is higher? Some councils perhaps maybe feel compelled to opt for the lower price to satisfy procurement guidelines and so on, but there are criteria in there that would allow them to vary that should they so choose. Do you think that whole area is clear enough, or does that need to be tidied up in any way?
Okay, I think I'm aware of the example that that you're raising in relation to that. As far as I'm aware, I'm sure Laura will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is guidance and regulation around that was, well, it was brought in maybe about 2016, and that was about price and quality being factors in relation to procurement. And I think the fact that I think that where they lost out on the contract, they did have it previously. So I think it shows that it is possible. And again, I think that's what we've tried to do within that, is that there is a mix of domestic legislation, international legislation that we have to abide by in this, but we want to ensure that we are providing as much flexibility within that to try and encourage local suppliers, first of all, to bid for those contracts, but also to be successful in the bidding for that. So I believe that flexibility is there to enable that to happen. But again, if the committee's hearing evidence around that says otherwise, then that's important for us to reflect on and see if there's more that can be done in relation to that. But I do think, we see local authorities do it and award those contracts to local suppliers. And we want to see more of that, of course. So however we can help to enable that, we ultimately seek to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Just on that, and before I bring in Mark Griffin, I mean, in that particular situation, as the government, do you have an intention to look into that situation to understand why we had a local supplier and now it's moved to a different supplier, and what, just kind of for learning, and then therefore what needs to happen in terms of supporting those SMEs who may have got the contract but then lose the contract, and why are they losing it?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a decision for East Ayrshire Council in that example, so we wouldn't expect to, to try and change that. And that is a decision that it's up to them to make, and they've taken that decision. But I think, just as I was saying in my response to Willie Coffey, though, I think ensuring that there is the flexibility that we are helping some of our smaller and local producers to be able to get access to these contracts is really important and part of the work that Laura was describing earlier in her responses as well. But I think specifically looking at that example, I mean, there are going to be other opportunities there. I think Scotland Excel are going to market with, I think, their next generation of milk and alternative dairy products framework, which again, these are part of the different things that we look at. Can they be broken down into smaller lots or geographical areas that will enable some of the local producers to bid for those contracts? So there are going to be other opportunities there. And that I would say, even in terms of the overall Scottish Government catering contract, the supplier who unfortunately lost out in that situation there supplies the Scottish Government in relation to the contract that we have. So again, we try to make sure that we are working with businesses so they feel confident enough in the first place to be able to bid for some of these contracts. But I think that ability is there. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Laura. I've covered it.
To say that public contracts must be awarded on a combination of price and quality, and each the weighting should be appropriate to each individual tender exercise.
Yeah, and just to say as well, I mean, there was a duty that I think came forward in 2016, the Sustainable Procurement Duty, where it's very clearly outlined that public bodies have to think about how they are improving social, environmental, economic well-being in general, and all the different areas that they can focus on as part of that, so that all of these different important measures are given that due consideration.
Okay, thanks. I mean, just for clarity, I wasn't suggesting that there be an intervention on East Ayrshire Council. It was more just, what can we learn from what happened in this situation, and so therefore then be able to support SMEs in the future. Yeah. I'm going to bring in Mark Griffin.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. In 2022, through separate committee inquiry work, we had concluded that it was really, really difficult in accessing land for communities who have local food growing aspirations. And I just wonder if there's any particular parts of the Good Food Nation plan that would help overcome those barriers and really support local communities who have ambitions to become local food growers.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, I think in relation to whether that's access to allotments or to land, I think that's where the different policy areas we're looking at and giving consideration to the Good Food Nation plan is going to be really important. I mentioned Section 6 earlier in the specified functions, how we will have to give consideration or we have to have regard to the Good Food Nation plan and delivery of those outcomes as we're developing policy or exercising our functions in specific areas. So I think that, this is our starting point and we can only hope to improve that from here. But I mean, when you look at the work that we're taking forward through land reform as an example of that, I think that's key in delivering on the Good Food Nation outcomes and hopefully providing more access to land. And, we're undertaking a review of community rights to buy at the moment to ensure that that is doing as intended. We understand that a few of those powers are quite difficult for community bodies to use, so we want to try and improve that where we possibly can. And again, that will all help feed into the Good Food Nation outcomes in and of itself. So I think there is a lot of work underway that is captured by the plan that ultimately will help deliver on that.
Yep. And you talked about NPF4 and the planning considerations around the application for fast food and other things. The government talking to local authorities about their local development plans to make sure that there are specific areas allocated for community food growing in those plans at all?
Oh, well, we would certainly be hoping through, I think, through the different requirements that there are for local development plans and what they have to consider. Again, I would hope all of that would be feeding into local authorities and the work that they will be looking to bring forward for their own Good Food Nation plans, and certainly something that they could consider as part of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks. We've got a few more questions. Next one is around the third sector. So your colleague Ivan McKee brought forward the Public Service Reform Strategy, which talks about the third sector being a key delivery partner. However, we've heard from Age Scotland that the National Good Food Plan, which maybe was worked on before the Public Service Reform Strategy or in parallel, fails to mention any of the contributions made by local community charitable groups and third sector organisations and the services and support that they offer to communities. And I'd be interested to understand if that's an oversight and if there's an intention to revise the plan and acknowledge them further.
Oh, no, well, again, that's why the scrutiny that the committees are undertaking on the plan is so important, because if there are areas that there are particular recommendations that we should perhaps reflect on or look at to incorporate within the plan, then of course I'd be happy to consider that. But I wouldn't want to give the impression that we don't absolutely respect the position that, you know, the role that our third sector bodies have in delivering. In fact, you know, we support a lot of third sector organisations in delivering delivering towards the overall outcomes that we have there. But happy to hear the committee's feedback on that, and if there should be a greater reflection on that specifically within the plan, because we do very much recognise that role.
Yeah, it does seem that some local authorities are working through the community planning partnerships on delivering this. I think that's an interesting space. But what we've heard in our work on community planning partnerships is that's a mixed bag, in that some community planning partnerships are tremendous in that they really do include communities and that third sector voice, including kind of co-chairing meetings and things like that. And other spaces we've had evidence, maybe it's changed since we did that work, where communities feel like they're up against the wall in the meeting and not really included. So that seems like it's a potentially useful forum for some of this discussion.
And it could well be, and that's the thing, community planning partnerships could be that forum where I would certainly hope that local authorities and health boards would be sharing the development of that work and how that's relevant to the work of the community planning partnerships too. So, and I think that that's an area that we'd be considering, or perhaps looking to issue guidance on community planning, asking community planning partnerships to consider the Good Food Nation plan and its outcomes in relation to the work that they're doing. But certainly I would hope that local authorities would certainly be using those forums to feed into that process.
Great, thanks. And another question that we've got is around the data. So you kind of talked about this almost at the very beginning, that you're setting this baseline and beginning, but the national plan accepts there are issues with procurement data. The plan includes various high-level indicators relating to each outcome, and be interested to understand to what extent data is available at a local level to help track progress on these indicators.
Yes, as I touched on in my response to some of the earlier questions, I think, you know, we recognise where there are data gaps. And again, that's where I think the next version of the plan will certainly have a lot more information in that regard, because we'll have been able to get that baseline information from the indicators that we have against the outcomes set out in the plan at the moment, but also using that time between now and then to try and fill some of those gaps where information it would be useful to have that we don't have at the moment, and look to collect the relevant information. That's also where I think the work of the Scottish Food Commission is going to be really important in terms of helping us with those recommendations, areas where we need that research to be undertaken. But it's also important to highlight the review periods that we have too. So the plan, even though the plan would only be revised on a 5-yearly basis, it's reviewed every 2 years. And the Food Commission has to outline, you know, if our policies aren't delivering against the outcomes, what changes we need to make to those policies to ensure that we are delivering on what we've set out.
Okay, great. Thanks. And you've talked a number of times about the Food Commission, about it being a scrutinising body. They were here last week and talked about being a critical friend. But I'd just be interested to just really hear kind of clearly what the Scottish Government has a sense of the Food Commission doing in terms of assessing the effectiveness of local plans.
I really envisage them in having that role, and their role is quite clearly set out in the legislation too, and the expectations there. But I think that it's great to have, I think, that independent voice to look at what we're doing, to look at the policies across the piece with that. I think they have quite a broad range of experience there at the moment as well. We have the chair of the Food Commission, 3 members of the Food Commission appointed now. So they are going to have a really critical role in assessing the different policies that we have. And as I say, especially for those review periods, being able to set out, right, well, if something isn't working, setting out then how we intend to change course. But I also see them as being really helpful in terms of, we talked about some of the data gaps, where do we need more research, being able to have those discussions with them and looking at their assistance in that regard too. So the scrutiny element is really important, but I think that research element and the provision of further advice in relation to the broad range of areas that the plan covers will also be really helpful.
Okay. So Dennis Overton was at the Rural Affairs Committee's session on Good Food Nation, and he did talk about how academics are already kind of coming to them and saying, how can we help in this space? So that's exciting to see that the Commission also becomes this almost lightning rod for academics and researchers to kind of say, what can we do? But I wonder have we done any thinking about how local authorities actually access that information and make sure that local authorities and health boards understand that resource will be there for them?
I would hope through the conversations that we're having, we'll be able to make that clear and establish those relationships. And I think that's been key to the work that the Food Commission have been doing so far since the commissioners have come to their posts. Obviously, we're still to recruit a chief executive for the Food Commission, as well as a wider team to support that work. But I think it's the establishing of those relationships has been a key focus for them at the moment. I don't know if there's more you would want to say on that, Tracy, or in terms of how they're setting that out.
No, I would just repeat that the building of relationships has been going on very well since Dennis came into post. He's made a huge amount of effort to do that and has made very good links. So I think when the Scottish Food Commission is fully up and running, they're at a very good starting point.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, that concludes our questions this morning. Many thanks to the Cabinet Secretary and your officials for your contributions this morning. And I'm now going to briefly suspend to allow for a changeover of witnesses. The next item on our agenda is to take evidence as part of our scrutiny of the Scottish Budget 2026 to 27, and we're joined in the room by Malcolm Burr, who's the Chief Executive of the Corlia nan Níl Shire, and we're joined online by Nikki Riddle, who is the Chief Executive at Clackmannanshire Council, Thomas Glenn, who's the Chief Executive at Perth and Kinross Council, Ken Gurley, the Chief Executive at Fife Council, and Dr. Dawn Roberts, who's the Chief Executive at Dumfries and Galloway. And I welcome our witnesses to the meeting. We've got around 90 minutes for this discussion. There's no need for you to operate your microphones, and members will try to direct their questions to specific witnesses in the first instance. However, if you'd like to come in, please indicate to myself or the clerks, or online, do so by typing an R in the chat. And I'm going to begin the question. So this one, I think I'm going to bring you all in for this question. But Malcolm, as I said when we were in private, we're going to probably end up picking on you a lot because you're the only one in the room. So I'll aim the question initially to you, and then we'll go around everybody online. So just a broad question around the main challenges. So what are the main challenges facing the Collier? And what would you like to see in the Scottish Budget to help address these?
Well, thank you, first of all, Convener, for the invitation to the meeting. The challenges for the Corla are probably the same as for every other local authority, only more so. There are lots of spice charts in your briefing note, and one of the ones that isn't there is the one that shows that we have had the biggest pro rata reduction in our revenue funding over the last 10 years of around 18%, and that's just a consequence of funding formula, static population, etc. But the challenge of not having multi-year budgets, and we all know the reasons, or at least some of the reasons for that, is a major concern at a time of falling revenue. One can live with that when revenue is at a higher level, but when you are not sure what you can do with whatever money you will have in the next year, it does not make strategic planning and delivery any easier. Now, I say that, I don't mean to say we haven't done any, because we have, and I hope I'll be able to talk a little about what the Corla's views on public service reform and the solution it opens to our financial sustainability can be later on. But it is difficult to make plans to which you can commit. It is difficult to take on employees to deliver these plans, because you're never sure whether you might have to dispense with their services in the next year or the year after. So it does not encourage strategic thinking. I would say it encourages retrenchment, it encourages keeping going, which I think we all legitimately have to do. And finally, I would say we're all deeply committed to what's loosely called transformation. We're all deeply committed to what is called the preventative agenda, and we know what these are. But it is extremely difficult to deliver these while at the same time keeping the lights on and running the services you have. That is the fundamental issue. Having said that, adversity produces invention, and adversity produces, I think, genuine collaboration. But that, of course, has to recognise that the organisations with which you are collaborating are also likely in a strained financial position and are facing the same pressures as you, and they may or may not respond collaboratively. They may retrench. Right. It's a complex situation there that is not made easier by single-year financial settlements.
Okay, so that's loud and clear. A multi-year indication would be a really helpful thing. Can I just, if anyone else has got anything new and different to add, has anyone indicated in there? Anybody want to put an R in the chat function, and then I'll call you in so that I don't just pick on people who don't want to say anything. Okay, Dawn.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to join you this morning. And just to support Malcolm's points, I'll not repeat those, but I just wanted to make an additional point around the flexibility of funding. So in addition to, the limitations of 1 year funding, we also experience in local government that the challenges around ring-fence funding and restrictions on use of funding, which limits our ability to be flexible, reduces our autonomy, reduces the ability to be creative in how we can address the challenges that we have, and reduces the ability for us to channel resources into prevention, early intervention, and really address some of the challenges that we face now and into the longer term. So as well as the restrictions of 1 year funding and lack of multi-year funding, the way in which funding comes to us, which can be restrictive, ring-fenced, is a further challenge, I would suggest.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that addition, and good to kind of understand what that lack of flexibility does in terms of constraints around autonomy and creativity. And Nikki, I think you've indicated you wanted to come in.
Good morning, committee. Thank you very much for the invitation as well. I'll try very much not to repeat what colleagues have already said, but I just wanted to give an example of Clackmannanshre's particular challenges, given we're the smallest mainland authority. One of the things that I would say is that we have very few levers. So, for instance, in terms of things like income generation. So if you look at a number of the flexibilities that are coming from Scottish Government just now, a lot of those will require particular contextual requirements to be met, which by and large Clackmannanshire doesn't meet. So, for instance, things like the visitor levy, would generate next to no additional income. It's not really conducive to the environment we're operating in. What I would say as well is that our particular environment as a council area, we typically trend around sort of bobbling up a quartile in terms of deprivation levels. But what we see is that there is a level of need and complexity of demand that flows through our systems that is most definitely trending above that level of deprivation. And that is not something that is taken account of through any of the distribution mechanisms. Even through when you look more closely at things like the needs-based indicators. So that's a particular challenge for us where we've got, as a small mainland authority, but significant levels of need, which actually quite often places us up alongside councils like Glasgow and Dundee in terms of some of the challenges, particularly social challenges and financial challenges our communities are facing. Excuse me, sorry, I've got a bit of a sore throat. Okay. I just wanted to say one of the things, in addition to what Malcolm and Dawn has raised, is because of that context, we've long been in the transformation space. So our current transformation programme has been in place since 2018. Because of our scale and the lack of economies of scale, we do have a very strong history of partnership and collaborative type models that we've adopted. But what I would say is that it is really tempting to in the immediate term in terms of looking for service and financial sustainability without thinking about the impacts on outcomes. And that is just as important. All three of those elements are considered. So I would underline the importance of investment in prevention and early intervention, because that is the way that it will help us to manage those future medium to longer term demands and needs that we see coming down the line quite significantly for some authorities in Scotland just now. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Nikki. And I think that's interesting to hear your point about the distribution mechanisms not working for a local authority of your size and on the mainland. Ken, you indicated you wanted to come in.
Thank you, convener. Yeah, I'll not repeat. I would concur with
audio is not good. Hang on a minute. Your audio doesn't seem to be coming in. We heard you and then you dropped out.
Is that okay now?
Yep, try that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would concur with what Malcolm and Nicky put forward there in terms of the budget challenges with the multi-year settlements would be a benefit. Maybe just a couple of other points which I suspect we might come on to in a bit more detail of challenges around the workforce constraints. We have real difficulties at the moment in recruitment in certain areas of local government. I think the multi-year settlements don't help in that regard, but particularly to emphasise on the digital agenda and the need for transformation in that space. We find it incredibly difficult to attract the calibre of people we need into these positions within the current pay scales, and it's definitely a constraint in moving forward. I think as well the second point we've made is just on demographics, and again probably fairly consistent with others, but the changing demographics certainly in Fife are placing large expectations on us in health and social care in particular, and again budget settlements make it difficult in year to plan for that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Thomas, you haven't indicated, so I'm not going to push you. I might direct the question. You might have something to answer on the next question I've got, but actually, Ken, I'm going to come back to you just because you mentioned social care. So we're aware that local authorities are doing more now in the areas of early year provision, free school meals and adult social care. So if you're doing more in those areas, I'd be interested to hear what in each local authority are you having to do less of, and what impacts these reductions are having on individuals, businesses and communities. So quite a big question, but maybe Ken, if I can come back to you on that to start. And I think we might have sent you a message about your headset and microphone. Don't worry about that. Just continue. We can hear you well enough.
Apologies, convener. I keep getting a message on mute, which I'm doing it this now.
It's now kicking in. Okay, is that better?
Try that again. Say it again.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's much better.
Now?
Yes, good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, in terms of health and social care, particularly in Fife, that has been a huge challenge for us in working with partners in the NHS. And pressure on the service last year was an overspend in the order of about £38 million. So this year we've got a huge transformation programme ongoing within the Health and Social Care Partnership, working to try and reduce that. And they're doing a great work at the moment to get that down. But the pressure, I suppose, moving forward, we have been able to contain some of these pressures through balances, which has meant it's not impacted too much on other services, if that was your question, moving forward. But as we move forward into future years, unless we can get health and social care under control, which is incredibly difficult aligned to the demographic pressures, then it certainly will begin to impact on other services across the council, and there'll be difficult choices to be made.
Okay. Well, that's good that you're managing to balance, but yeah. Thomas, you indicated you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. And my apologies as I couldn't respond to your earlier question. I was having some difficulty. So could I maybe make an initial comment before I come back on the
Certainly.
Health and Social Care?
Yeah.
And without repeating what Malcolm and other colleagues have already said, one of the challenges for us in Perth and Kinross, and I would suggest more widely across local government, is the challenge around about prioritisation and demand. We continue to receive budgets, and I fully support the idea of multi-year settlements, which are predicated on a view of demand which is historic, and talk about small percentage increases over a number of years. What we are not doing at this point in time is we are not making decisions which look to prioritise on the key areas which government and councils would wish to focus on, whether that's poverty, whether it's economy, whether it's climate change or public service reform. Because often the demands that are placed on us, and some of those might be political, some of them might be from community, are such that it's difficult for us to reduce and remove services which have historically been provided. Now, I would not argue for a second that they don't offer some value to communities, but we're in a place now, because of the demand on local government services, that we're increasingly being asked to not make savings, but to make cuts. And the language in your third bullet point about the impact of efficiency savings, increasingly we are cutting service. We are not saving money for other days. We're cutting services because we see a greater need for prioritisation. Libraries, leisure centres, etc. are all good things to have. But when it comes to a choice between focus on those in greatest need, those in poverty, older people and vulnerable, then we are having to make demands which require us to focus investment into those areas. And just to move into your health and social care point specifically, and to reiterate Ken's comment, as a council, as a health and social care partnership, we saw an increase in our budget provided by this council to our IGB of 3% for the current year, something which we've continued to try and invest in. We saw an 11% increase in demand for care at home services in year from the beginning of the year to July, a requirement of 1,000 additional care at home hours. We saw an increase of 21.5% in costs in learning disability services in year, none of which can be planned for because some of that's people having strokes, some of that's people coming into services for the first time. We were all, as chief executives of local government, at the Solace conference last week. We heard Ross McGuffey from NHS Forth Valley and Fraser McKinley from The Promise both state that the funding of social care is the thing which is the greatest challenge to our financial position just now. And the resource transfer from health into community-based services is a critical need in terms of how we can respond to the demands in communities.
Thanks very much. Dawn, you indicated you wanted to come in.
Thank you. And I indicated before I listened to Thomas speak, and he made the point that I was going to make about, the pressure on social care services being, the key factor really in terms of our long-term sustainability from a Dumfries and Galloway perspective. We have consistently, year after year, transferred to our IJB the funding allocated from Scottish Government. But this year we're facing significant financial pressure and have transformation work ongoing. But it isn't transformation work, alone. It is about how we can deliver within our means, which does mean potentially reductions in some services. And if we end up at the end of the financial year with significant pressure, the impact is on our other council services. We're already planning for significant reductions in future years, with the pressure in social care on top of that just brings further difficult decisions in terms of the full range of council services that we deliver. And there is no room for investment in prevention, early intervention within that space. There's just no capacity within our finances to be able to do that with any meaningful outcomes. So it is a really challenging space for local government and for Dumfries and Galloway within that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And yes, it's certainly from what yourself and Thomas have been saying, it's challenging also when communities have an expectation on what they've always had in terms of a service. So I think we've heard quite a lot in this committee and in other forums that I've been in that there needs to be that conversation with communities about the pressures and the changes that need to come about. Malcolm, you wanted to come in. Very
briefly, Convener, simply to go back to the early learning and childcare aspects that you mentioned, these are real priorities for us. Have they hurt other services? No, because we've largely used our Crown Estate funding, our coastal communities funding to support a lot of these services, because there is nothing to be taken from health and social care. One observation I would make, though, is small amounts of funding go a long way in smaller council areas, as Nicky Bridle will know too. But we are fishing in the same pool of workforce. If you expand early learning and childcare, that can be detrimental to home care and to residential social care, and indeed to the hospitality industry and other industries that are fishing in that same pool of workforce. So that too has to be managed. I agree with you that the way forward is working with communities to develop their own solutions and support these, I think, rather than local authorities funding them directly. If there is such a demand, it could be said glibly, there should be a market. But if there isn't a market, there should at least be a middle way of some market solutions supported by public service provision. That, I think, is the way forward, certainly on early learning and childcare below the age of 3, for which there is much demand.
Thanks for that. Nikki.
I'll try not to repeat what colleagues have said, but I entirely support the comments that have been made, very, very similar to ourselves in Clackmannanshire. Just a little bit of context. Since the inception of our IJB and the health and social care arrangements, the contribution we make to the integrated budget has almost doubled. And I make that point because the way that the funding comes to us each year, pretty well, there has been a requirement for us to passport the same resource plus any additional ring-fence funds to the partnership. The impact of that has been that basically this spend is now becoming a significant part of our total budget, which means that, coming back to your original question on this, it means that there is less for all the other services across the council. So that's where we've had to make the reductions. And that's been obviously ongoing for a number of years now. We've got an incredibly challenging situation too, which I'm sure the committee is aware of. Our integrated budget overspent by 11 million in 2024-25. There is an extremely challenging delivery plan there to bring back financial balance. But all of the decisions that have had to be taken in that space will have significant impacts in terms of service delivery on the ground, but also the connection into other council-wide services. So I just wanted to make that point, but it is a very, very real issue for us just now.
Thanks very much for bringing that perspective from your council area. I'm now going to move to a question from Fulton McGregor, who's joining us online. Fulton, maybe once you come on, you could direct your question to someone in the first instance. That would be super.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, convener. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so good morning to the panel. All of you have more or less mentioned in earlier answers the budget gap that's facing local authorities across Scotland this year. I'm wondering, how does your particular local authority make sure that communities are involved in decisions about how to address these gaps? And can I ask in your answers if if you give a particular focus to vulnerable groups, how are vulnerable groups considered when budget decisions are being made, particularly in relation to where savings need to be made? I'm quite happy with whoever wants to go first, but since Nikki finished last time, if you want to go again.
Nikki from Clacks. We're having a technological pause.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Sorry.
Okay, I can hear you. Yep, great.
For some reason, that wouldn't unmute, but thank you for your patience there. Just in terms of the consultation approach we take, we have a very well established and embedded set of arrangements. We do specific work around budget, which actually covers quite a long period. It's already started, for instance, for the next budget round. So typically we'll do a number of phases. We'll start out with some of the sort of bigger questions around priorities. So getting a reaffirming of priorities in consultation with our residents and service users. But beyond that, as the budget process progresses, we will have targeted engagement with particular communities of interest. So be it older people, young people, so on, to get feedback around particular proposals that may feature in specific budget proposals as they move forward. We're particularly interested in engaging with those groups where there may be protected characteristics to make sure that we get a really good coverage of that feedback. All of the feedback that we receive is shared with elected members unfiltered. They just receive the whole feedback as a pack ahead of the budget process. Obviously, representations are made directly to our elected members, as well as through officer channels as well. That process is just for the budget, but actually we have embedded groups that take place year round as well. So there's actually a wealth of existing information from a number of groups. So we would always be looking for to make sure that we're covering off things like our equalities impacts, Fairer Scotland duty and so on, as we're going through the consultation process and gathering all the intelligence and evidence in support of making sure that there's been good engagement. We do also have a number of examples from previous years where budget decisions that were to be taken have been changed as a consequence of consultation, which I think is probably a good example of the fact that the consultation responses are listened to and scrutinised in a great amount of detail by elected members. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Malcolm, do you have anything to add?
Not too much to add. Just in the Western Isles context, of course, we have one elected member for every 900 electors, so there is a real closeness between the community and the elected members. But in addition to the IIAs, the impact assessments, all of these formal means, it is very important, I think, to go and talk to people directly. So we do budget consultation through ward meetings, through our area forums, for which there is one per ward. Now, these consist of every organisation and group in that locality which wants to be a member, and that's very, very useful indeed. As you can imagine, it's a focus group perhaps would be the equivalent, but it is universal of the organisations in that ward. And we still do we still do public meetings through the leader and myself and the chief financial officer, and these are well attended. But as always, who is not at these meetings? Who are the hardest to reach? I suspect those who are enduring poverty, really, who are not caught by any of the other groups. So we do use it. We have a multi-agency anti-poverty group which is very active and which we use to distribute funding. Now they know about whom they are talking and they know whom they are helping, and we do rely a lot on them for their take. It's not necessarily a formal consultation, but we run the budget proposals past them, and they will give a view on how that will impact on, particularly on those on very low incomes.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're doing your best to try to reach people as much as possible. Dawn, you've indicated you wanted to come in.
Thank you. And from a Dumfries and Galloway perspective, very similar comments, really. We start the process through community engagement rather than consultation. We also provide an awful lot of information to our communities about where the council gets its money from and how we spend it and the priorities that we have, and seek feedback. And then when we get to the point of having formal proposals, we have a range of mechanisms. We use budget simulator approaches. We have community conversations, and we have very targeted consultation with particular groups, and we do our impact assessment. So it's very, very similar. And just like Nikki described, we provide all of that information to our elected members, so they have that in advance of the formal budget setting process. And so they have that information and they find that really valuable. You know, the comments that our members make as part of the budget process is that to have the insight and the feedback from communities, from particular groups, from all ages, from all parts of the region, are just so valuable to inform them on what's most important and what they need to take into account when making their decisions. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I haven't seen any indication from anyone else, so I'm going to move on and bring in Evelyn Tweed with a number of questions. Evelyn.
Thanks, Convener, and thanks to the panel for all your answers so far. My question, I'm going to direct this one to Dawn because she'd made a comment earlier about ring fencing. Dawn, does the reduction in formal ring fencing over recent years help local authorities address your local challenges?
Absolutely, and thank you for the question. But absolutely, ring fencing is a constraint for local government, and particularly when it comes with requirements to spend on particular things in particular ways. And to remove ring fencing it gives us the flexibility and the autonomy to be able to direct resources and fund and finance activity that is relevant to our local area, relevant to what matters in Dumfries and Galloway, and we can ensure that it's outcome focused rather than driven by a set of requirements. So, you know, we are very keen to ensure that, you know, the work that we do through the council, through our community planning partnership, it's all about people, places, and it's about outcomes. So the greater flexibility that we have in terms of our resources, the better able we are to be able to meet the challenges of that our communities face and deliver improved outcomes for the people of the region. So very much welcome any steps to remove ring fencing and constraints and requirements. So thank you for that.
Do you want to pick up your next question?
Thanks, Convener. I'll direct this one to Malcolm in the first instance. How would an agreed fiscal framework between the Scottish Government and COSLA help local authorities? And what is your understanding of the delay in agreeing a framework?
I think discussions about the framework of the framework are well advanced. I mean, I think there is a commitment in the Verity House agreement to work on a fiscal framework. I suspect the constraints are around financial concerns. I mean, the Scottish Government too, I know, works on a, because of the relationship with the UK Parliament, works on a 1-year basis. But and so we work on a 1-year basis. But we must, I think, do better than that, because otherwise nothing will change. At a time of what's known to be financial constraints at both Scottish and UK levels. It is essential, though, that there are things that could be done around a fiscal framework. There could be an agreed minimum, for example, for local government, as for any other sector, with, I'll call them top-ups for specifically agreed policy areas. Part of my council's vision of public service reform is just that kind of concordat between Scottish Government and local government in a way that allows strategic planning and allows growth and allows capacity to borrow and all of these things. But you asked me how a fiscal framework would help. I think it would give much more certainty than we have at the moment. It has been remarked that the funding formula and everyone is nervous about changing that formula because inevitably there would be winners and losers, but it is based on outdated ideas of demand. Of that there is no doubt. We have growing demand in primary health and social care and for specialist services, and it doesn't address that. And so it is topped up in various ways and by various means. So that doesn't help financial planning. So a fiscal framework, I think, it would be a brave step for all parties, but we cannot go on like this because the pot is shrinking. And if the formula doesn't meet demand, that can only be met by special pleading, by, yes, revenue raising by councils, but that is not going to shift the dial. Large council tax, yes, of course, all of these levers, but a fiscal framework which says this is what it costs to run public services in Scotland, and this is what's done by NHS, this is done by local government, this is done centrally, this is done through agencies. That, I think, is absolutely essential, and that's recognised in the Verity House Agreement. But it needs to proceed at pace. Sorry for the long answer.
That's fine, Mal. Thank you.
I wouldn't apologise for the answer. I think that was very helpful, actually, because we've talked about the fiscal framework as part of the Verity House agreement. But I think that maybe you're the first person to have made clear around the connection to the funding formula as part of that agreement and the need to actually get into that space. And I think I remember in 2021 when I was first convening a session around the budget, the funding formula came up, and it was clear that nobody really wants to go into that space because the challenges that it can bring up. But we're clearly hearing today, certainly from Dawn, that it's a challenging formula that's not working for them anymore. Okay. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to bring in Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, panel. Last year, the committee heard about the increased borrowing by councils when it comes to funding capital projects. And a recent BBC Scotland report talked about there being an estimated local government debt of around 19 billion. So how confident are you that councils are managing debt? And how confident are you that we won't see councils going into financial difficulties? And maybe if I go to Malcolm first.
Thank you for the question. My authority has had historically high levels of debt because in 1975, when the Corley was established out of local government, there was much to do, particularly on housing improvement, particularly in Harris, Euston, Barra, where facilities were, to be honest, basic. So we incurred a lot of debt, which is we're now, I think, officially under borrowed, but that term can be a bit flexible. I can safely say we are managing our own debt very, very prudently. We readjust it. That's not the word, but you know what I mean. Every year, in order to maximise our financial advantage. I would like the capacity to borrow a little more, actually, not because I'm desperate to incur debt, but I can't see how the capital programmes now are not sufficient to build up to replace a big school, a big care home on their own. So I think there has to be a combination of that prudence with your capital programme with a bit of additional borrowing. But locally, yes, I'm very confident that the debt is managed.
And maybe, Nicky, you indicated that Clackmannan is the smallest council. We know that Clackmannan is the smallest. So what difficulties or opportunities or possibilities do you have as the mainland smallest council in Scotland as to how you manage debt?
Thank you very much for the question. We delay there with the meat coming up. We've actually been very prudent in this area over the years. So, as you're aware, I've been at Clackmannanshire since 2010. When I joined the council, we were one of the highest debt councils in Scotland. I think we were ranking about third or fourth. So, given it was within my influence at that point in time, we put in place a strategy to actively reduce our debt. So it brought us down to mid-table. So over a number of years through our treasury management strategy, we've been able to bring down the level of debt. So we compare very favourably in the Scottish context. What that has allowed us to do latterly, as the economic position has shifted, has been to invest in our capital funding, in activities that would stimulate local economic growth. So you'll be aware that we've got some large-scale capital projects, but that again is being managed very carefully through our treasury management strategy, very transparently in terms of the debt levels. So basically what we're doing at the moment is the debt will increase, but that will be managed down again over time to come back to the pre-investment level, if you like, of these significant investment pieces that Council has agreed over the last few years. So it's very, very active management from our point of view of that particular area.
Thank you.
Sorry to break your flow, but we've got indications from Ken and Dawn.
Okay. So, Ken, you wish to come in? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Just a bit of context on Fife, and I think in relation to the question on sort of prudency, I think at Fife we we have been very prudent with our finances, and I don't think we're at risk of bankruptcy on the back of capital investment. But having said that, we had to take 200 million out of our capital plan in the last review we did. In fact, we've had a 10-year rolling programme on capital, which has been successful for a number of reasons. But one of the main reasons for that, I suppose, is stimulating the economy in Fife, which has been great. So we're seeing quite a drop now in that investment level in terms of where we can contract. I think Malcolm mentioned schools. Schools is an example now where we've had a rolling programme, and some of that are largely thanks to Scottish Government for support in that space. But for the first time in 12 years now, we don't have a programme rolling forward for replacement of schools, which is a real challenge for us. So we are faced with spending money which is needed to keep schools updated and try and keep them in the condition that they should be. But again, we really need some new funding in, so additional funding in for replacement of some of our outdated buildings. I think as well, things like roads continues to be a pressure. You know, we probably have a difficulty in funding the level of investment year on year into roads that we'd like to. We have been stretching it to try and get it up to a bare minimum, but that's a problem. So I just would say that I think the process is in place at Fife Council to control the capital spending. You know, will keep us on board and on stream for delivering, but the revenue consequences of trying to fund that capital are just too difficult at the moment.
Thank you. And Dawn?
Thank you. And in terms of Dumfries and Calloway, we are a low borrowing council. So we're low on the in terms of the league tables, but that has increased in recent years in a planned, managed way in line with our strategy. And you know, we do apply a very prudent approach. And where we are at the moment is we do have an ambitious capital programme that we wish to see delivered for the benefit of communities to stimulate growth. However, capital resources are declining. The expectation is that will decline, and so the considerations that we have currently is around additional borrowing. However, that comes with revenue cost, clearly. And so we advise members very overtly, very regularly on our capital programme and in relation to the funding requirements. And, you know, there is a need now as we move forward to prioritise our capital programme and be really clear about any revenue implications of any additional borrowing. So I have no concerns as the Chief Executive. I'm absolutely confident in our finance team, and you know, we have strong and robust arrangements in place, and the accountability through members is really, really clear and transparent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thomas, you indicated you wanted to come in, and apologies, I skipped over you. You had indicated you wanted to come in on the fiscal framework question as well. So if you wanted to comment on that as well, that's fine.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I'm having some problem just with the chat function. Yeah, just very briefly on the fiscal framework, I think there's a fantastic opportunity for us if we can get that agreement in terms of what it means for communities, because whilst the agreement between national and local government will be positive, the ability for us to have that certainty to then work with communities, and it goes back to Mr McGregor's question about how do we work with communities, because if we were in a position then to support our voluntary organisations, many of those being anchor organisations in local communities that help us tackle poverty and other key challenges. So I think the benefits aren't just for local government and central government, the benefits are there for communities in terms of our ability to fund them. But on the more general point that we're dealing with just now, just round about borrowing, unfortunately, like Malcolm and Nicky, I'm not in a position that I can claim to have reduced our council's borrowing. Our borrowing has increased from about £550 million when I joined about 4 years ago, and by 2029 it will be up about 1.3 billion. I'm not taking all that as personal spending from me. But it's been a very deliberate decision by Council to look at investing in public infrastructure. We've spent over £150 million in new education facilities, £150 million in new roads and bridges, Destiny Bridge being the latest, and somewhere in the region of about £130 million in leisure facilities. So we see that as an investment in services for the public. And we are confident that we have a model for managing that borrowing over the future, particularly because we have allocated a sum from our council tax monies to directly pay for our borrowing. We allocated a sum of 1.25% and growing each year towards our borrowing costs, which has helped to bring that in and be repaid much quicker. But that also, I think, goes to the heart of one of the other key questions that you asked at the beginning in terms of the challenges for us. And that's the ability of local government to continue to be able to make decisions on council tax locally and how it then invests those resources in local services and for local communities.
Thank you for that. My second question moves on to a topic that we maybe touched on earlier in some of the responses, and that's about workforce and costing for workforce. Local government costs about 70% of your funding for local authorities, total revenue expenditure. So if savings are required in years to come, how flexible are councils at having to reduce the costs of the workforce? And what options are open to councils should a reduction in employment costs be required? I'll go to Malcolm first because he's in the room. Thank you, Malcolm.
I'm happy to start that conversation. I mean, I've been chief executive of the Corla now for over 20 years, and in that time, the workforce has, I say this with no pride whatsoever, has reduced by about 250 full-time equivalent. Now, that is about 400 people in a total workforce of now of around 2,200. So you can see it is quite significant. And those are the efficiency savings which are gone. I say hand on heart, I would never say my organisation is as efficient as it could be, who could, but there is no fat. And we are now starting to notice if someone goes off sick for a month, then the service will suffer, rather than someone else picking up the slack. I think that's universal across Scotland. That's been done very humanely. It's been done in a very civilised way by rigorous workforce management at a very high level, indeed at my own level. But that capacity, I think, is exhausted. And that is where I would like to suggest public service reform comes in. Certainly for an area like the Western Isles of 26,000 people, and it was the establishment of the Integration Joint Boards back in 2016. I wouldn't say it prompted the thinking, but it certainly enhanced it. Yeah. We thought, why do we need three major bodies, NHS, Western Isles, the Corla, and now the IGB, to deliver services for 26,000 people? And it's not just about combining backroom functions. We should do that more, but it takes two or three to tango in that particular dance. That I think is an obvious one. But it's pooling your strategy. It's pooling your strategy resources, delivering in a different way, and that's why public service reform, I genuinely think, could and will ultimately make the difference.
Thank you. Any indications?
No, it doesn't seem to be anyone else that wants. Is there anyone else who would like to come in on workforce? Thomas.
Chair, thank you. Again, I'd indicated in the chat, but clearly it's not coming through. I think Solace has done some work in this area, the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives, and we did produce a workforce strategy for Scotland last year. There are a couple of key areas where I would highlight that we've got continuing pressures. A number of professional disciplines, we are struggling to recruit into those. And most significantly, again, going back to some of our earlier focus on social care, as a large rural authority, our ability to recruit into social care posts is a particular challenge. Now, what that has done, I think it's also required us to be quite inventive, going back to Malcolm's comment about public service reform, and to work with communities. And just as one example, what we've done there in areas like Kinlochrannoch, and we're now looking at Burnham and Dunkeld, is working with communities for them to take on, deliver and own services, and the ownership, I think, is incredibly important. So we're looking at supporting cooperative models where it's the community that deliver in their own community. And that we're extending into other areas as well, run about community transport and the purchase of vehicles, allowing communities to own those types of vehicles and be supported for us. So I think that whole recruitment issue is playing into how we look at models of service delivery, where communities need to play more of a role, and we need to be prepared to give up control and cede the management and control of services to local communities. I think that's got to be a positive outcome for communities.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, yes, we've got quite a few other people who want to come in on this now. Ken, and then Nikki, and then Dawn.
Thank you, Convener. Just briefly to add to what Thomas was saying there, in Fife we've got a situation where we have reduced the workforce in certain areas in particular, and you see that pattern across Scotland. So the environment type area, we're probably about 30% down on where we were 10 years ago. But since then, I suppose the opportunity in terms of public sector reform and looking at the digital space is very much where we want to go now. We still have areas in Fife where it's difficult to recruit to, so we're hopeful through introduction of AI and digital technology we can maybe see a reduction in the establishment overall without having too big an impact on the actual posts, because we do have vacancies, and if we can be creative enough in redeployment activities and retraining people, hopefully we'll not have too big an impact on the workforce. But we do recognise moving forward with the budget challenges ahead. In Fife, we're looking at approximately about £42 million less budget in 3 years' time. And on the back of that, recognising that we probably will need to have a smaller establishment moving forward. So it does take us into these elements of community delivery and try to be a bit more engaging with the communities and try to see where we can work a bit smarter together. But essentially, I think we will see over time a reduction in the number of posts.
And Nikki.
Thank you very much, Convener. I would a little bit of context from us. Since 2010, in Clackmannanshire, we've made revenue savings of £74 million against a current revenue operating budget of £171 million. So obviously, you can't take that sort of proportion out of public expenditure without impacting workforce. So, of course, we've reduced workforce over that period. Probably the shape of the types of employment contracts we've got have changed quite a bit over that space as well. But I would agree with Malcolm's point particularly, and Thomas's actually, about what it means in the reform space. So if I look at our current budget round, in our corporate functions area, predominantly all of the savings that are being proposed will impact staffing levels because there are only people there. So we've been looking over a long period of time at the sorts of things that colleagues have been suggesting. So the same shift that Thomas describes in Perth and Kinross, we've been doing in Clackmannanshire as well in terms of increased empowerment of our communities, really promoting engagement and participation in terms of engagement with service delivery models. We've also done a lot of work to look at how we streamline bureaucracy in terms of how we manage and report our services. And similarly, as Ken says, again, real focus on the use of digital to make sure that our staff resource with the professional expertise is focused on those greatest value-add activities. So it's a really significant issue for us, and one which actually in the whole time I've been here, I don't recall as acute a recruitment and retention issue as we're currently facing actually across a range of professional and technical services. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dawn.
And SBDS last year that was launched. Really important piece of work where local government came together to identify workforce challenges, and that's been reinforced really by the recent report by the Accounts Commission in relation to the workforce challenge. And local government is experiencing significant challenges with regards to recruitment and retention, an ageing workforce. You know, the majority, as you said, of our budget is about people. So any budget reductions that come forward, it does have an impact on our workforce. And we, you know, with transformation, public sector reform, that brings opportunity, but we need to invest in the skills and the capacity of our workforce to be able to respond to those opportunities for the future, to give them the best opportunities moving forward in terms of their working lives, and, you know, to have fulfilling roles within local government. And, you know, one of the areas of interest for local government through the recent Invest to Save funding that was made available by Scottish Government was around workforce and how we can invest in, you know, the workforce of local government to be ready for and engaged in and maximise the opportunities for transformation and reform. Unfortunately, that wasn't a successful bid into the Invest to Save fund. But, you know, the requirement is still there, because to deliver long-term transformation, to deliver long-term public sector reform, we need the workforce to be able to achieve that. And, you know, we're looking now as a sector in how we can progress some of those key priority areas of work that will see that investment in the workforce for the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And I'm now going to bring in Willie Coffey on public service reform.
Yeah, thanks very much, Convener, and good morning, everybody. Leads us nicely into the wider issue about transformation and transformational change that the Accounts Commission, Audit Scotland and others have been talking about for many years. It's just to give colleagues maybe the opportunity to share with the committee a couple of examples from each of your authorities about what does transformational change actually mean to you? What have you managed to achieve so far that you could describe fairly as transformational change, and how do you see it developing into the future? And I may as well start with Mr. Burke again, because you're sitting in front of us there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, that's a fundamental question. I mean, I'll maybe start by just saying what I think transformational change is not equated with structural change. It's not just equated with moving things around. It is, to me, it means a place-based, outcome-focused. I'm trying to avoid the jargon, but these are meaningful terms to me, and I hope they are to you. I mean, what is needed for this locality, that, in my case, the Western Isles? What are the outcomes we want to achieve collectively, and how do we pool and bring together our resources, financial, workforce, infrastructure, buildings, to bring these about? That would be truly transformational, and that is the focus of the work that we have been doing, and that is now supported, I'm pleased to say, through Invest to Save. I won't cover that because I think you may come on to that later in the meeting, but I'm encouraged by the greater emphasis on place-based leadership in, for example, the Programme for Government. Very pleased to see a reference, obviously, to our own work on single authority models, but without banging that drum, it is good to see place-based solutions coming through the policy delivery, not just the policy discussion. We have discussed this for a long time. In terms of that is our primary transformational work. ambition as a council. I mean, there are lots of the Barra and Battersea Community Campus, which sounds very local, but that is another example of transformation in action with government support. It's an example also, and this will be my one negative comment about how not to take decisions in Scotland, but it came right in the end. That's a campus of a new school, 0 to 18. UHI has now joined the party, so that will include further and higher education, Police Scotland, NHS, and that includes acute hospital provision for Barra and housing with extra care on the social care side. That's what we should be doing, not just for communities of 1,200 people. And it came right in the end. The fact it took so long to come right is perhaps something we should examine about how we take decisions in the Scottish public sector. But I don't want to dwell on that. That's an idea that was genuinely transformational at the time, and it will be when it's delivered, and it's now moving forward. So I could go on, but I'm conscious of time.
Thanks, Malcolm. Other colleagues, what does transformation look like in your authority? Maybe Ken up in 5? With the people indicating. Okay.
Nikki, come on in.
Oh, thank you, convener. So in Clackmannanshire, I did mention earlier we've had a current transformation programme in place since 2018. It's based around 3 broad areas of activity, which are around sustainable inclusive growth, empowering families and communities, and health and well-being. So I thought it was just worth sharing that because it kind of captures quite neatly the main aspirational space for us as a council and as an area. In terms of specific things we've been doing, I'll just pick 2 or 3 as requested. So one of the things that we did quite a while ago was establish a multi-agency approach called STRIVE, which it represents is safeguarding through rapid intervention. So what that is about is looking at members of our community who may be on the cusp of statutory intervention, needing those supports, but not quite at that point. And by wrapping all the public agencies around them, getting the right supports in place so that they do not go into the place of requiring that statutory support. It's attracted a lot of interest, and we've had a lot of people come and look at what we've been doing in that space. And we had an independent evaluation done of that work after the first 12 months. And it was suggested that we had saved collectively £66 million of cost potentially to the public purse, which in a small area like us is obviously hugely significant. So that was one example. One of the other areas that I'm sure many members of the committee are aware of that we've been involved in is the Family Wellbeing Partnership, and now an earlier adopter in the whole family support area. All of that has been about, it's actually very aligned with what we've been working on for many years now in Clackmannanshire about developing very accessible services where there are no barriers to entry, where our service users are empowered and have a voice in the decisions that are made around the service provision for them. And that actually it's a very holistic view of what support they need, so we look at the whole person and the family. So not just their immediate needs, just not with what they're presenting with, but actually thinking about the conditions and other intelligence that we have around their context. That obviously is taking us right into the area of a key priority for us, which is around tackling poverty and inequality, particularly focused on child poverty, but obviously we can't address that without looking at the whole family situation. So we'll be doing a huge amount of work in all of that, and with some success. So just recently, everyone will be aware of the recent attainment education stats that have been published. So we are starting to see the benefit of several years of investment in that particular area, and we're seeing a reduction in the poverty-related attainment gap for the young people that we've been supporting and their families through these programmes. So that for us is proof that we're on the right track, but it won't stop us from continuing to try and find more ways to innovate in this space. So hopefully a few helpful examples there.
Thank you, Nikki.
We've got Ken, Dawn, and then Thomas.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. So up in Fife, in terms of transformation, we're taking a slightly different approach in how we've done it previously. So in the past, we've had distinct transformation programmes which have been successful in delivering substantial savings. This time, what we've done moving forward is we're trying to embed transformation more into all our service plans moving forward. So we have 3-year service plans to try to look out to what the council will look like in 3 years and how transformation can play a part in delivering it against some of the efficiencies needed in these areas. But on top of that, we also have a change programme in Fife, which is really looking at the no wrong door approach, which is along the lines of what Nikki was describing there about making sure that we're connecting communities, that we're not just dealing with isolated cases, and making sure that folk don't fall between the cracks. And there's quite a few councils operating in that space, and we're sharing best practice in there. We're also looking at place as a concept as well, and looking to join up our services a bit more around about place, which does feed into that no wrong door concept. And also on digital, big programme on digital to try and see where we can make efficiencies moving forward and use of technology. And we're backing that up with a 10 million change investment fund that we earmarked for bidding into, basically, to try and either resource technology or resource workforce to try and support that. And I think in terms of examples moving forward, I would say that transformation is not all about necessarily just getting in about, for example, technology. There's things like we just need to pay some more attention to. So an area for us where we've transformed the experience is kinship care, whereby we struggle in kinship care and had a real focus on supporting the families, try to keep children as close as possible in the local area, try to work as far as we possibly could with local families to work on kinship care and make that a more supportive environment for children. And that's been a huge success. And that's an area where I would say, by putting in a preventative approach into that area, we've been able to make significant savings moving forward. And that's the challenge, I think, in a lot of these areas, particularly around social care, is that we do need to put that investment in, and often it's in terms of time and capacity across the workforce. And that is a struggle at the moment, I think, with the efficiencies that we've taken out of management over the years moving forward. And just briefly, another example which is similar to the one that Malcolm mentioned, the Dunfermline Learning Campus in Dunfermline. We've put together 2 high schools into one in that campus and brought the Fife College in there as well. So the plan, it's early days, the college have just literally moved in as we speak, but the plan there is to operate a system whereby we can get far better integration from young children all through high school and into the college environment moving forward. And again, that's been built as the largest passive house educational establishment in Europe, I believe, and we're kind of hopefully working with the Scottish Government and Scottish Futures Trust on moving that forward in terms of energy efficiency. There are a few others, but I'll probably leave it there in terms of time, if that's okay.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks. Dawn.
Thank you. And in Dumfries and Galloway, similar to Fife, we have our council plan that sets out our overall priorities for delivery and for transformation, and the activity is embedded within our service plans. We have a change fund that supports and enables transformation and reform in services. And I would just observe sometimes it's the small projects that have the biggest impact. And, it doesn't need to be whole council transformation to make a real difference for people and a real difference on residents. So one example of a really impactful transformation that we've introduced is around digital delivery of qualifications at higher and advanced higher level. So access to some of those courses is really challenging for small and remote schools. So now we've got all schools have access to a digital hub where they can attend live classes, and it has saved, significant funding for schools in terms of being able to tap into that resource and be able to access that resource. And the feedback from school pupils has been really positive in terms of their ability to engage with others and be part of that virtual learning environment. And it's been award-winning, at national level in terms of innovation and transformation, and has a very real impact on our young people. So that's something that we are proud of. on a broader scale, council-wide, our digital programme has gathered real momentum in recent years, and we've seen significant shift in some of our services, which has been really beneficial. And we've seen, for example, in our road service, we've invested in digital innovations to transform how works are planned and delivered, which has enabled us to move from reactive maintenance to much more proactive works and, preventative maintenance works and smarter investment decisions in terms of our road assets. So just two examples from Dumfries and Galloway. We've got similar examples in terms of school estate, exactly the same in terms of consolidating and improving efficiency of our school estate, and in terms of how we work with communities to enable them to deliver services and improve outcomes locally. We're really proactive in terms of our community asset transfer activity and supporting communities, to achieve their ambitions locally. So we've got, quite a range of transformation examples at different scale, and some digital, some's about working with communities, some are about our assets, and it's all reflected in our plans and our future plans as well. Hopefully that's a helpful response to your question. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn.
And Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Very quickly from me, and I won't repeat the general points because we do all the same things that colleagues are doing around about transformation, service redesign. We would, I think, echo the comment from Malcolm that this is a cultural piece as much as it's about systems and processes and structures. And yes, we've changed the shape of our organisation. We've pulled £11 million out in the last couple of years. We've reduced the number of senior leaders by about 11 people in the 4 years I've been there, and redefined posts. So there's lots of that stuff, but fundamentally transformation is about delivering on our purpose, which for us is about tackling poverty and inequality. And that does mean things like the whole family work, targeted work with children with additional support needs, where there's a significant pressure across local government because of demands in that area. And unfortunately for us, we've seen some positive outcomes in that round about a reduction in the number of children in Perth and Kinross identified as living in poverty. So that's the outcome that we're looking to achieve. The digital space colleagues have talked about, and I pay credit to my colleague Nikki here, who's led on a lot of work alongside colleagues in the Improvement Service and Solace, and both of us have worked with government looking at the new digital strategy. But on specific examples, we're now moving into that AI world. We're using Copilot, where we saw much of local government manage the move from analogue to digital in social care last year. And again, colleagues in the Improvement Service are looking at systems for managing blue badges, for visitor levy, etc. So there's a phenomenal amount of work going on in that digital space. But my final comment would be around about the property piece, which a number of colleagues have commented on, and I'm delighted that Ken's got the Passive House estate campus in Fife and took our lead in what we've done in our leisure and in our education facilities, Ken. But the point about property as a real transformation enabler, I think, is incredibly important at a community and at a place level. We are part of the Single Scottish Estate group. We've been working with public sector colleagues, partners in lots of small ways, co-location with police, colleagues in NHS in different buildings and different locations. We have, I think, a really brilliant example in a place like Pitlochry, where we as a public body looked at our whole estate, recognised that there were inefficiencies in it and that we could reduce how we used that estate, sought to co-locate things like leisure, libraries, housing and education together, And what it also allowed us to do was to deliver against another key priority, which was delivering affordable housing in a rural community. Because we'll take those sites that have been freed up and we will deliver affordable houses in an area where affordable housing is like hen's teeth. So transformation can have a real change, I think, working round about the delivery of other outcomes. But it's not all good news, I would say, in this space. And I think the commitments we've made within the public service reform strategy by Mr McKee and the work particularly around about property, I don't think personally are moving fast enough. And I would say that based on an example. We have been working with Scottish Government for 4 years. Look at co-locating Scottish Government civil servants into a city centre location in Perth. It has been torturous, would be my only way of describing it. And I think the pace that we're moving it round about those types of developments is something that we need to put more of a shoulder to. That process will save the public purse over £1 million a year, a large part of that to Scottish Government. But we have saw challenges, obstacles in that process, and we are still a year away from having government colleagues in that building. We are bringing in SEPA, we're bringing in health services, we're bringing in others into that building because we think it's the right way to do in terms of reducing costs, but also in terms of protecting jobs in the city centre. But for us, we need collectively to be doing more in terms of that effort to use property as part of that transformation and wider public service reform piece.
Thanks, Thomas. Very comprehensive from everybody. Thank you very much, Convener.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to move on and bring in Megan Gallagher.
Thanks again, Convener, and thank you, panel, for your contributions so far. If I may start on the best value audits, because I know that this is something that comes up time and time again in relation to transformation and reform and assessing progress that councils have made. When I was chair of the audit and scrutiny panel at the council that I was elected as a councillor, I was always informed that the best audits were like comparing apples and pears in relation to other local authority areas. So I'm wondering, how can these reports be best used by local authorities, and is it time for the Commission to perhaps try something new to assess transformation and change in local authority areas? Sorry, Malcolm, you're getting picked on again to go first.
It's a very interesting question. I mean, I think the Commission does its best to help us in these reports. The use of the word transformation, though, is too loose. I mean, too often it's saying, you know, you face these external structural issues like finance, you've got these internal ones like workforce, and the country's running out of money, so you have to transform. Now, that's one doesn't follow the other. You might just say, well, you have to stop doing things. But none of us want to say that. So does transformation mean efficiencies? Does transformation mean pushing things more out to communities? Or does it mean the sort of things I've alluded to, which is you know, saying, let's go back here. What works? What is going to deliver best for the place we're in? Obviously, we think local government as the elected body is part of that. It should be outcome focused, not structure focused, and I think that has been the difficulty in Scotland. We're very structure focused, and that has to change. So, but your question was about the audits, and I wouldn't talk about structural change, but I think the Commission has to recognise that it is not deliverable by councils. It should be led by councils as the elected body, but it has to be delivered across the whole public sector. And I think, to be fair to other public sector bodies, it's all right saying, you know, go and break the barriers down and go and deliver jointly. That can happen where the local leadership is right, but you have to be fair to statutory bodies like SEPA, like NHS. They work to a statute. They're there for a reason to deliver these services. They don't have the freedom that an elected body like a council does to say, we'll do this in a different way. They need, it's not the case that they need permission, but it needs to work in harmony, and it needs government leadership on that. And that, I think, is what's come through with Mr McKee's statements, with his timetables, which we welcome in our case, and with Invest to Save. But the Commission, I think, has to recognise that. It's not saying community planning can lead it either, because community planning comprises those very bodies. But are these organisations empowered and challenged and required, to be honest, to be part of that change? That, I think, is what the Commission should be focusing its attention to, rather than just saying, our council's transforming. Because to get back to one-year budgets and other constraints, transformation of that narrow kind has to take its place with running the services.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. I'm not entirely sure if there's anyone else.
So there's other people coming in, but I'm just going to say at this point, we were going to be ending around noon, and we've got quite a few more questions to go. So I'm going to go. You were all really great at the beginning, and I think it is important that you've had time to flesh things out for us as well. It's been super. But now we're going to have to go to if you've got anything to add, or if you vehemently oppose something a colleague has said and you want to get something else in. But in this instance, I'm going to bring Nikki in.
Thank you, Convener. I'll keep it very brief and be mindful of the clock. It was just, it was a little of a poacher term gamekeeper type comment, because I have some experience in this area. I used to work for the Audit Commission in England and the Accounts Commission and Audit Scotland in Scotland. What I would say is, at the same time as we're transforming and reforming, I think our auditors and inspectors need to be in the same space. So just based on my experience, it's becoming more and more difficult to engage both the expertise, because the things that we were looking at, we are now looking at are more complex. A number of things are more novel in their nature, which means that actually some of the traditional skill sets might not be as relevant in terms of evaluating the position. And it's just a bit of a plea, really, to think about that in the mix. I think the Accounts Commission is doing a really good job in this space. It's really trying to engage with us and understand what's going on. But actually, if I look at my own experience and how challenging some of this is, some of the things that we're having to consider as a local authority in terms of new models, extremely complex legal and technical issues that sit at the back of it, it's probably just worth thinking about the kind of audit skill set that sits in the background too. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, we've got the Accounts Commission coming in, so we can bring that question to them. Ken.
Very briefly, Nikki actually covered the bulk of it. I think we're going through audit process at the moment, and I think there is obviously a very tight framework that the auditors have to work to. And I think the best value reports and process does enable us to get a good sense check of where we are as an organisation in that comparison. But it does feel at times that a bit more flexibility for the auditors, because I know they do have to follow very strict guidelines in terms of what that feedback might be. I think that could be helpful.
Thank you. I don't think anyone else wants to come in on that. Megan, I'm going to come back to you on your housing question.
That's great, Convener. And, it was an open-ended question because I know that best value audits are something that happen to all local authority areas. So just to clarify that point. On the issue that I want to raise with councils this morning regarding housing budgets specifically, and again, housing is a very topical issue just now, given that we've several councils who have declared housing emergencies across the country. I've been made aware that in certain local authority areas they have struggled to find access to housing budgets from the Scottish Government. So, for example, those within the housing sector who have applied for housing funding going through local authorities, there therefore seems to be a block at Scottish Government level. So I'm wondering if this has happened in any of your local authority areas and what impact that could have on utilising all levers to try and build more homes in your areas. I'm not sure who wants to start with that.
Anybody want to come in on that one? Got that? If you're facing that issue?
No.
Doesn't seem to be anyone in that. you want to come in briefly, Malcolm?
I'm pleased
yeah.
to say, Convener, that on the housing side particularly, I find More Homes Division one of the absolutely best to work with, and they have been very generous with their area allocation to us, and I'm pleased to say we've been able to spend it, so that's not been our experience.
Okay. And in relation to accessing the affordable homes budget, again, is that something that councils can access quickly and at any point? Because again, given that the budget was cut and then reinstated again, of course there is a little bit of worry and concern whether or not that full budget can be used. And again, it's just to reassure more than anything that councils can absolutely access that money.
The constraints with housing, of course, are often on the contractor market.
Okay.
So that the availability of contractors, particularly in rural and island areas, so that's also a factor to be borne in mind. So all I would ask, whether there was that delay and then reinstatement, that there's a bit of flexibility about actual spend. Commitment might be one thing, but spend can be another. Yeah, when you're at the mercy of a busy contracting industry.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. And Thomas, you want to come in on this?
Very briefly, thank you, Chair. We haven't had particular challenges like Malcolm. I'd say our relationship with colleagues in housing has been very positive. The issue, again, I think, goes back to some of the Frisco framework comments, where if we work in an annualised cycle, and given what Malcolm's already said around about how long it takes you to develop out sites, then I think that's a more fundamental question here. But certainly the support from government, particularly around about buybacks and other levers, I found has been very positive. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks very much. I'm now going to bring in Mark Griffin with a number of questions, and just let's all be mindful that we are 2 minutes before we were going to end. So I think we're going to try, I think we maybe need about 15 more minutes for this, so I hope everyone's okay with that. Over to Mark.
Thanks, Convener. I've got questions around transformation involving multiple different organisations working together, and I'll probably come to Thomas first, since you've touched on your earlier answer, because the area I want to focus on is adult health and social care. We've got integrated joint boards as an area of transformation within the public service. They are essentially supposed to operate where health and local government come together, and they are combined budgets which are preventative spend, reduce admissions, reduce attendance at A&E, speed up delayed discharge. Now, the commentariat or the consensus from local government seems to be that local government are investing in these services. The savings are made on the NHS budget, and that saving isn't necessarily coming back to local government. So since you touched on it and the pressures health and social care are presented to your council, maybe come to you first, Thomas, and then Ken, since you touched on it too.
Thank you for the question. And first, I'd preface this by saying I think we've got a really positive relationship with colleagues in health in lots of areas. But I'll immediately move into some of the challenges, because I think fundamental to this is at the heart you're still very much focused on a medicalised model of intervention and looking at health. Now, people like Paul Johnson, in terms of the work that he and others are doing around about population health for Public Health Scotland, are focused that improving health is not about a medicalised model, and it's not about inpatient services. So I think we need to look at that shift. And the recent strategy around about population health, I think, is a really positive development in that space. Having said that, I think we still haven't seen significant resource transfer in the near 10 years that we have had IJBs and health and social care partnerships in place. I think both Nikki and Don commented on that earlier on. And we still tend to, and I would make this challenge to government, be very focused on inputs and outputs, delayed discharges being the greatest of those. And I don't envy my colleagues in health in terms of what they're asked to report on in that area, where there's a focus on a small percentage of the experiences of people going through services, when the vast majority of people, in terms of their discharge, are positive in getting them out. But I'd use an example, if I can, to highlight where I think there's a real need for us to look at how we do this differently. If we look at learning disability as an area, and I highlighted the increase in cost, 20+% this year for us in Perth and Kinross. We have individuals, we have adults who have got learning disabilities and who've been in residential settings for most of their adult life. Small handful of them. But the cost of creating a community-based response to that group will require elements of capital to create the right facilities, but will then require significant levels of staffing, resourcing to move to a community model, because these individuals will often need high levels of care at all times. As we move to close certain inpatient services, there is nothing that directly sees that resource transfer to a community setting. And I know for less than a handful of people in Perth and Kinross, that will create something up to the order of about £1.5 million ongoing annual revenue pressure for us, which will not directly flow from our colleagues in health. So there needs to be a conversation about how do we better move if we all accept that our response to people's health needs to be a preventative response and needs to be a community response.
Thanks, Thomas.
Anybody else wanted to come in on that? No? Malcolm, briefly.
To say very briefly, I mean, I agree entirely with what Thomas has said there. I mean, the IJBs do not, in themselves, deliver that integration that perhaps they were set up to do, because, as Thomas has just given as an example there, the capital remains with the two organisations, both of which are, well, certainly the local authority side of which is quite capital poor just now. So if there is a need, it has to go through the assessment processes of two different organisations, and one, and it's not the local authority one, is much slower than the other, just because of the NHS Scotland capital improvement, capital assessment process. But the big issue is resource transfer and the lack of it. I mean, as needs have grown, no doubt in the acute sector, it's not for me to talk about NHS acute services, because that's not my area of expertise. But I think that the savings that have been made, and locally, I mean, our hospital has gone from 200 beds to 50 beds in about 15 years. But those resources have not transferred to what I'll call the community side. They've probably been consumed in increasing demand in acute. Now, whether that's right or wrong is not for me to say, but it should be transparent and it should be debated and it should be the subject of local and national political choice and direction, I suggest.
Okay. Thanks, Malcolm.
Ken wants to come in, and then you can move on to your Investor Save questions.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief on the back of Mr Gribben's reference to Fife. Yeah, we in Fife, because we are co-terminus, I suppose, have that benefit of having kind of one partnership with ourselves, NHS and Health and Social Care. But the crux of your question is very much the challenge there. Budgets, and if you're operating in a deficit, as we have been for the past couple of years, it's incredibly difficult to get that resource transfer moving from one to the other. We have a good operational setup. We do a lot of work together, and we can recognise the benefit of putting in preventative measures. When it comes to actually getting funding to do that, it becomes difficult because there literally isn't the money available in the system on that basis. And again, you might look back to when the partnerships were set up back in 2014. I suppose, and allocations at that point in time were based on the setup at that point in time in terms of council work and NHS work. And again, I suppose it might be time picking up this wider point about review in terms of health and social care partnerships, how we try and bring about a bit more flexibility.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. Okay, my second question was on the Invest to Save fund, and just broadly to ask how local authorities have engaged with that fund and whether you think the £6 million allocation is enough. And I'll maybe come to Dawn first again, since you touched on it in one of your earlier answers.
Thank you for the question, and I'm sure others will have things to say about this. So, first of all, just to say that from a local government perspective, very much welcome the intent around investing in transformation and change. You know, it was a very welcome step by Scottish Government. However, it was very rushed. It came out of the blue for local government. There'd been very little, if any, prior discussion around the funding. I would say that the civil servants who worked with us, worked with local government, worked really positively and constructively with us in terms of supporting us in our thinking around putting bids in. So that was very welcome, but it was really rushed, a 3-week turnaround. I was responsible. I'd carry the workforce portfolio for Solace, and we submitted a workforce bid, and that involved working with councils across Scotland to pull together a programme of activity that we felt met all of the criteria and was a really strong bid, supported by colleagues in Scottish Government. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful in securing funding, which is really, really disappointing given the conversation we've had already this morning about the importance of workforce in relation to transformation and change and long-term financial sustainability of the public sector. So it took a long time as well, I would say, to receive feedback. And I think the observation I would have was that, you know, the transformation can take longer to achieve benefits than was kind of afforded within this process. So to deliver, you know, the change from the workforce investment would have taken a number of years to materialise. And so I think that's one of the challenges, you know, with that bid. In terms of 6 million, you asked the question, is 6 million enough? I think there's from my perspective, there's a real challenge that if we're talking about public sector reform, genuinely talking about public sector reform, my question would be, why was one element ring-fenced to local government? It was, because that forced us really to, look at particular areas of activity, I think in some cases, that was about local government specifically. Although, there were opportunities to work with other parts of the public sector. But I think a more kind of commissioned approach that's about true public sector reform, aligned with public sector reform strategy, and with a longer lead-in time and proactive dialogue with all parts of the public sector around how to get the most out of such an opportunity for, and using funding would be really welcome. So the opportunity to work more collaboratively and, a real focus on outcomes that might take longer than 1 year, 2 years to materialise. And no real ring fencing, I think, is to give maximum flexibility, reflecting my earlier comments, would be really welcome. So greater flexibility in applying funds over longer time frames, and a meaningful dialogue about what the funding is for, how we can make best use of it, what the role of local government is in that in terms of the wider public sector reform agenda. So it was a positive step, but it was one-off. So is this going to be sustained? Is this going to be an ongoing programme that we can gear up for collectively as the public sector to maximise the benefit of that funding? Very much welcomed, but a lot of learning, I think, from this first round. Thank you.
Thanks, Dawn, for that detail, and I think hopefully there's government officials listening to what you had to say, and they'll take that on board. I'm going to bring in Thomas and then Malcolm.
Yeah, the direct question is enough. No, it's less than a 200th of the local government settlement, and I don't know what it is for the whole public sector kind of funding, but at £15 billion for local government, £6 million is welcome. We'll always be happy to have it, but the points that Dawn has made about timing, etc. It does feel counterintuitive to have a public service reform where there's allocations that have been divvied up to different public service agencies rather than making us work together more, because it could be a useful lever. I'll use the opportunity, if I can, just to focus on the Invest to Save project that we secured via Perth and Kinross, but fronted by the Digital Office, which is the local government digital office, where we received £500 million. We are looking to invest that through tech to help local government reduce its energy. But the work, again, to bring partners on board only really happened after we got the bid, because we didn't have the time to work with the Energy Network, didn't have the time to work with the property leads. So Dawn's point about, please let us do this thing over multiple years and let us work in partnership with other public agencies. That will deliver the greatest value, I think, and greatest impact for communities.
Okay. Thanks. And Malcolm.
Yes, I won't echo these points, but I had the responsibility of submitting the bid from Solace for all sectors other than workforce, and indeed it was in 3 weeks' time. It took some effort to obtain and refine and then submit applications. But to be fair, the application process was relatively simple. It wasn't unduly constrained by unhelpful template approaches and decisions. The decision period took twice as long as the application process, which I think probably indicated that it was a bit more complex than the time period allowed. But we have been looking for this fund for some time, or a fund like this, and we are very, very pleased to have it. I mean, Cornyn Inland Shire has been working on public service reform since 2017, and I've been seeking and sometimes received a lot of help from Scottish Government colleagues with various aspects of it. But this is essential funding to take this to the next level, simply reflecting on the capacity of many councils. It's interesting, the ones taking forward single authority models are among the smallest: Orkney, ourselves, Argyll and Bute. So that the capacity that's supported by Invest to Save is absolutely essential and very welcome. But it's not all, of course, about staff. It's about taking these concepts out to the wider community planning partnership, if that hasn't been done already, and of course to the wider public. So that's and we'll be using the consultation means I spoke of when we spoke about budget strategy. But a one-off fund, I hope it isn't one-off. It's over 2 years, and we were fortunate to receive the full amount we asked for. Maybe I should have asked for more. A continuation of the fund, refining what has been achieved with the first amount of funding, would obviously be very helpful. But my final word: what are we looking for from PSR? We're looking for agility, flexibility, place-based pooling of funds together. Now, Invest to Save should reflect that. It should also be agile and flexible to enable what needs to be done in each different locality, and that will be different in different places. But it is very welcome, and it's for all the speed of the application process. It was done and dusted in about 10 weeks, and that's very good indeed.
Good, positive. Yep. Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. I'm just going to take a moment, and Dawn, this question is coming to you because you mentioned flexibilities at the beginning and also in your response just now around the Invest to Save. And I'd be interested to, this is around the general power of competence, and what your position would be on that. Would that help with flexibilities?
Interesting one, and I think we have responded on the general power of competence, and I think we in terms of the consultation. And I think, you know, whilst it's a welcome open flexibility, you know, we don't yet have any sense that we would rely on that for anything that we have in our plans at this moment. So, you know, welcome progress, but as part of that overall approach to, you know, improving flexibility, enabling agility, and, you know, achieving for your local area, really achieving for local communities. That's all I would want to say. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And Nikki, can I ask you as well?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, when we first saw the information on the power of competence, it was something that kind of caught my eye because I thought it could be something quite useful. One of the things that I did do was look at the extent to which it's been deployed down south, where I understand there's been something similar in place for a little spell of time. My understanding is it's not been widely deployed in the transformation space, which was a little concerning. So I think, you know, when I spoke before about we're already forging ahead in a number of what would describe as novel areas, it is quite helpful to see so that in an area like this, some others have gone before you, just to see how it could be used. We're still tracking it actually to keep an eye on how we could potentially use it. I think there is most definitely potential, but I've not seen any really good tangible examples as yet. So if anybody's aware of any, I would be very grateful because we have been actively looking for them.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else got a view on this, Malcolm?
I think it's a power of general competence, I think, is right in principle for any elected level of government, but it's important to get into the detail of how it's exercised and what the constraints are, and I think that has been the problem elsewhere. For public service reform, which could comprise an element of structural change, it's not about structural change, but I think to make it work, it will require some structural change. I think we should do the work we're engaged on, produce the models, and then sit down with a hopefully willing government to work out how we deliver that on the ground. That I think is what will make the difference. A power of general competence is fine until you read the small print and it says you can't do anything that's contrary to anyone else's operating statute. So there's a good power of general competence makes a huge difference. One in name only doesn't. So there's a lot of work to be done with that. But I don't think it should inhibit or delay any work on public service reform, whether we have one or not.
Okay. Super. Thank you very much. And I think that concludes our questions for this morning. And I just want to thank you all so much. I know you've got tremendously busy diaries, I'm sure, but it's been a really useful conversation in terms of our pre-budget scrutiny. I think it's been very helpful to really delve into some of the challenges that you're facing and some of the positive things that are going on in your council. So thanks so much for giving us your time this morning. I'm now going to actually move on to the next item. So the next item on our agenda today is to consider the following negative instrument: Council Tax Reduction Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Number 4, Regulations 2025, SSI 2025/212. Do members have any comments on the instrument? No one has any comments. Has the committee agreed that we do not wish to make any recommendations in relation to this instrument? We're agreed. Thank you. And we previously agreed to take the next items in private, so as that was the last public item of our agenda today, that concludes the public part of our meeting and we will move into private.